All right. Well, it's 12 Eastern time, so let's get started with our webinar for today. My name's Jordan Swain Fox, and I'm the Outreach Coordinator for the Center for Urban and Regional Analysis, or CURA, at The Ohio State University. And I'm really excited to welcome you today to our first webinar in the series Maps from the Past, the Impact of Historical Urban Maps on the Past and Present. This series is co-sponsored by CURA and the University Libraries Research Commons. And throughout the series, we'll be hearing from presenters engaged in research and historical maps to illuminate the links between urban challenges and impacts old and new. Today's guest, Yuliya Parshina-Kottas, will discuss how the New York Times created a 3D model of the neighborhood destroyed during the 1921 Tulsa race massacre. Before we introduce Yuliya, I just want to mention a few logistical items. If you require closed captioning today, you'll find a box at the bottom of your screen labeled with CC. You can click this box and select Show Subtitles to view subtitles during the presentation. During the webinar, feel free to submit questions at any time using the Q&A box, and we'll ask as many of your questions as we can towards the last portion of the presentation. If we don't get to your question, apologies in advance. You'll notice that the chat has been disabled, so use that Q&A function if you have any information to share with the organizers of the event. As you may have seen on our website, this event is approved for 1 AICP CM credit. And to claim your CM credits, you can log on to your My APA account on the APA website and enter the event into your online CM event log. At the end of the webinar, there'll be a brief survey. And if you have time, we encourage you to provide your feedback to help us improve these events. If you have any additional questions after the event, you can email me at swaim-fox.1@osu.edu. To learn more about CURA's future events or to sign up for our monthly newsletter, visit cura.osu.edu. You can also like CURA on Facebook and follow us on X, Instagram, and LinkedIn. You can learn more about the Research Commons and the events that they have upcoming at library.osu.edu/researchcommons. And with that, I'll pass it over to CURA's director, Harvey Miller, to introduce our speaker for the day.
Okay, hi everyone. Great to see everyone again, so to speak, and welcome to our summer 2024 series on maps from the past. And we're starting off with a really interesting topic and really interesting presentation today by Yuliya Parshina-Kottas. She is a visual journalist, information designer, and motion 3D artist with over 18 years of experience telling stories in digital and physical spaces. For over 9 years, Yuliya worked as a graphics and multimedia editor at the New York Times, where she reported, developed, designed, and produced visual stories, one of which she's going to tell us about today. Yuliya teaches graduate and undergraduate courses and workshops in visual journalism, motion graphics, and animation, and she is joining the full-time faculty of the NYU Tisch Interactive Telecommunications Program as an assistant professor in the fall. Congratulations about that, Yuliya. Before joining the Times, Yuliya created interactive experiences, spatial installations, and linear animations for museums, ad campaigns, and animated children's series. Her personal art practice, uses animation and illustration to explore themes of folklore and womanhood. And today she's going to talk about a project she did in the New York Times where she did a reconstruction of the neighborhood destroyed by the Tulsa race massacre in Oklahoma in 1921. If you don't know this story, it's a very, very powerful and tragic story about a thriving Black neighborhood that was wiped out by a white mob in 1921. And Yuliya is going to talk about the visual story and how they brought that about and how they made it this neighborhood come back alive. And I'll put a link in the chat to the article in the New York Times. It's really worth checking out. I really recommend reading it. So with that, Yuliya, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and to tell you about the story. You can see my screen, okay? Ooh, sorry. Wild ride to the very beginning. Many apologies. So I want to just begin by mentioning that there were so many people involved in the story, besides the people that you see on the byline itself, whose work I'm going to be representing, as well as my own. I think there were about 25 people total who touched this project in some way over the course of a few months. It was a whirlwind project, and one of the most meaningful stories that I've worked on in my almost decade at the New York Times. I will actually take you out of this ecosystem, so apologies for another whirlwind, but I wanted to give a quick scroll through the article itself. And in case you haven't seen it, I wanted to give you a glimpse very quickly, just so you have a sense of what I'm talking about as I describe the research and the production. So when the Tulsa Race Massacre centennial was approaching, we knew about a year ahead of it that we wanted to cover this story very deeply on a visual level. I was part of the graphics department, and so everything we do is driven by the visual as at its core. And so we thought we would do some kind of a reconstruction. In the beginning, we thought that it would focus on the events of the massacre and how it unfolded, but we quickly realized that what we really wanted to tell was a story of the people who thrived in the neighborhood before the mob attacked it. And so what we settled on was wanting to recreate the neighborhood as it was on the eve of the massacre and talk about all the businesses and all the lives that existed in these buildings that were, 90% of which were burned down by violent mob. And what I'm scrolling through now with my mouse are these two immersive moments that you can kind of, they're guided, but you can scroll through them and explore on your own just the general kind of breadth of businesses, as well as more deep dives into individual stories that we've researched over time. And we've also created a series of maps based of the neighborhood itself to give readers a sense of kind of a greater collection of businesses in the whole neighborhood, and as well as professions of the people who live there. And then, of course, Audra Birch wrote this beautiful lyrical piece about the events that transpired and what was lost. So that's just to kind of give you an overview of the piece itself, in case you have not had a chance to see it. But without further ado, here's the backstory of how it came together. Of course, with any project, we begin with a very deep dive into the literature and into any kind of archival, as well as contemporary, publications, articles, scholarly works that exist. This is just a few of the books that we kind of dove into. And I should say that this kind of began almost a year before the massacre. But as I've mentioned to Dr. Miller earlier, majority of the research didn't actually start until January 2021, only a few months before the centennial in May, because we were derailed by the COVID coverage that basically swallowed the whole department. And so we've explored some published works, and we started collecting just frantically anything that we could get our hands on remotely from digital archives around the country and Tulsa and Oklahoma. So this is just some of the many maps that we were able to find online. We started collecting images of people who lived in the neighborhood, majority of which were lost in the fires of the neighborhood, but we were able to find enough to kind of give us a sense of what was there. And then we started collecting images of the place itself. And so this is, I think we broke Google with all the links and with all the images that we were starting to kind of archive on our end as background research. And then we, dove deeper into the map. So into the maps, and this is one of the first maps from. Just want to make sure. Can you guys see the entirety of my screens, or is my Zoom interface kind of in a way?
No, it's good.
Okay. All right. So this is a map from 1918 that we found that had this beautiful rendering of, pretty close to the 1920 date of the massacre that gave us a sense of what the city of Tulsa looked like. You could see a little bit of the downtown and kind of the nature of the buildings, that architecturally existed at the time. But unfortunately, there was just this tiny little crop at the bottom that showed a single, a few actually blocks of the Tulsa neighborhood that we were interested in, which is Greenwood. This is kind of the gateway to Greenwood. And it really, this is the north and south are kind of flipped here. So you're looking at it backwards, but the majority of the neighborhood extended north towards the bottom of this flipped map. However, this gave us enough of an idea of, the buildings and the streets and like the nature of the neighborhood. And it helped us to start, to stir our imaginations and to start planning for what this 3D stage that we were building for the stories could be. And it also made us realize the importance of this block. This eventually became the one block that we truly focused on in terms of recreating the details. And we dove into the local archives, which were just incredible. We worked with the Tulsa Historical Society, with Library of Congress, and with the Tulsa City County Library. There was a bunch of other archives in the area that were tremendously helpful. Just to start kind of getting the lay of the land and starting to get the maps. This is an example of two maps, and now I am talking more about Anjali Singhvi's work, who was my co-lead on the reporting. And she was working with these two maps to kind of get a sense of the city overall. The one map from 1919, which was the census enumeration districts map, was really helpful to give us street names and to kind of orient us. But the problem we soon found in the 1921 map was that many of the street names have changed, especially after the census. And that became this really huge Easter egg hunt that Anjali had to go on, where we used the city directory to figure out the name changes that happened with the streets just within a few years, because we were trying to kind of bring everything together and eventually match it with the contemporary geography of Tulsa now. And the city directory was incredibly useful, but it was such painstaking manual work. Anjali had to sit there and go through these two maps and compare all the streets, compare all the changes, look at the street names that changed, and that resulted in yet another Google spreadsheet full of these changes we were collecting. We also read thoroughly through the report by the Oklahoma Commission, which was published in 1999 or 2000, that very carefully depicted the detailed events of the massacre itself. So we could understand, even though that wasn't the primary focus, we did use this report as a basis for one of the larger maps we created of the events, kind of towards the middle of the article. And we, dove into the Sanborn fire insurance maps as a guide for the building footprints. We were aware of this resource. We started looking for it right away, and we found a really great map from 1915 that was, it featured the neighborhood, and it was great, and it was available from the Library of Congress as a digital download. And it would have been wonderful, except the population between 1910 and 1920 exploded in Tulsa. So we knew, even though the map was from 1915, that if the population quadrupled between the two censuses, then whatever existed in 1915 might not be accurate for the city and the neighborhood as it was even 5 years later. So we were excited to have the 1915 map, but we were still hoping to find something more recent to help us truly recreate the neighborhood as it was before the fire, because we wanted to focus on it in a very detailed way. And I should reiterate that this was the pandemic. This is we started looking at this in February 2020. March 2020, we were derailed. But when we came back to it, the pandemic was still raging and the archives were closed. So it wasn't easy for any of us to just hop on a plane and spend, days and weeks digging through the actual physical archives in the city. And a lot of the work had to be done remote. So we're all pretty comfortable with internet sleuthing. So we came across some blog post about an exhibit that a local library had of this physical map, a sandbar map from 1920. And we were so excited. We reached out, we tracked it down, the physical copy, to the Tulsa Historical Society. And we worked with the archivist there, who was just incredibly helpful to scan the neighborhood. The archive had rules around scanning the entirety of any kind of archival piece that they hold, but they were able to accommodate us and scan all of Greenwood and parts of the downtown. They just couldn't scan the entirety of the atlas for copyright reasons. So we were able to get access to the neighborhood and the city as it was just a year before the massacre took Greenwood, or changed Greenwood. And now we had this map, but we knew that we wanted to create a 3D model of it. That is how we do a lot of these reconstructions, and we have a lot of 3D power in the department. So that was the ultimate goal. In the first steps were just to kind of bring these maps together and clean them up and prepare them for just to start even planning for the steps of 3D. So Anjali Singhvi painstakingly cleaned up all the mold and all the damage that existed in these maps that were scanned for us by the archive, by the Tulsa Historical Society. And she combined them with Photoshop and Illustrator, and made it a manageable file that we could handle and work with. She also matched it with the larger and kind of combined it with the larger city maps that we had that were really useful for us to understand the infrastructure of the city, that showed us things like trolley lines and other infrastructure details. Eventually, she and several, Tim Wallace, who was our maps coordinator, he's an editor in charge of mapping for the graphics department, and a few others were started manually georeferencing this in QGIS, trying to match it to contemporary geography of the city, which, as you can see in these two examples, was a very wobbly and difficult task. And eventually, Anjali, Tim, were able to derive this very clean map that didn't exist before, with street names painstakingly vetted for changes that corresponded to the actual street names of 1920 or pre-1921. We were just very, we created this vector map that we can now use as a base for a 3D model. So actually, before I jump into the 3D model, I wanted to talk about the data that was going to go over this map, both for the 3D model itself, but also for the 2D maps that we eventually created as well. And the basis of majority of the data was the census, but which Anjali worked with another researcher to derive about the neighborhood and the residents. But the Tulsa City Directory was one of the richest data sets. And it gave us a window into not only the kinds of businesses, but also the professions of the people in the neighborhood. So for many city directories at the time, the way that you could find out if somebody was Black, like if it was a Black-owned business, or if it was somebody who was an African-American resident, was to look for, and different city directors handled it differently, but at the time they were putting the letter C in parentheses next to any Black-owned business or Black resident of the neighborhood. So we used that letter C, and we were able to work with these digital scans of the city directory from the Tulsa library, and we OCR'd them, and we're able to process them and derive the businesses and the residents that had that letter C next to them. And that helped us get a sense of all the professions in the neighborhood. And we were able to place these individuals, and the businesses, but also the residents throughout the neighborhood. We were able to place them and geolocate them over this map that we've created. We were also able to use this map, this clean map, to map the damage of the fire based on the report of the Tulsa Race Massacre Commission from 1999. It had a very detailed time-stamped report of the damage and how the fire spread. And eventually, these are the maps that were published from that data, giving a sense of the different kinds of professions that existed in the neighborhood and the richness of the culture and the people who were there. So now, building a 3D city, we used that map that Anjali had painstakingly cleaned, and this is going to be familiar to Dr. Miller and his team, but we could have outlined everything in Illustrator and extracted the building footprints, but it would be such a long and painstaking process, and we only had a few months to work with. So Lingdan Huan, who was on our team at the time, was working with machine learning and algorithms, and he's already been playing around with them to kind of understand building footprints in sandborne maps from another city. So he wanted to train the machine learning algorithm that he was already playing with on these maps to create a better, sharper version of the city and the neighborhood, so we can create a 3D model. Then I apologize for those who are much more familiar with the process. I was not deeply involved in this, so many apologies if I butcher the description, but basically to train the algorithm, Lingdan Huan needed access to a lot of these maps because he needed a lot of different kinds of examples of how sandborne maps handle footprints and streets and all the labels, so that the algorithm could understand and differentiate and train a variety of visuals. But we did not have access to a variety of visuals at the time. So he actually procedurally generated sandborne maps that were fake maps. He generated a lot of fake maps that shared a lot of characteristics of real maps, but he used those fake maps to show the algorithm what a building footprint was. So he had these procedurally generated fake sandborne maps. He also generated black and white versions of them with masking out what the building footprint is, and eventually the algorithm would kind of look at the color map, look at the black and white guide, and learn what a building footprint was. And Lingdan's description of this process was, it sounded like training a puppy. He would go back and forth, he would baby it, he would look at the results, he would correct it when the corners were not sharp enough, and eventually derived a really clean, sharp, and satisfactory model. It was great. It was actually looking pretty good. He was able to sharpen the corners, but unfortunately, and again, if you have worked with this technique, you know that everything, once you've extracted these building footprints, everything is kind of just like a single height. Now the maps do, and not all maps, not all sandborne maps offer height information, but these maps that we had access to did. Unfortunately, we were just not able to get the algorithm, or Lingdan was not able to get the algorithm to recognize the number successfully. So he did write an application which allowed us to manually go building number by building number and enter height information for the buildings. And we focused on the areas where we knew there was a greatest height differences between the buildings. So mostly the downtown and some parts of Greenwood that we knew we were going to focus on. But since the majority of Greenwood was just a single story kind of house situation, we did not enter this information due to the constraints of time for every single building. So some of them were left at a single kind of height level. And then we brought this city that we've created into Maya. Autodesk Maya is a 3D editor that we predominantly used in our department in the newsroom. And so we brought this 3D model in to start doing the cinematography and the camera moves and start building the styles that you eventually saw in the story that I scrolled through earlier. But aside from the data, aside from the mapping and the professions and kind of this larger bird's eye view of the neighborhood that we, gathered all this like city directory data for and census data for, we really wanted to bring our readers closer, like to the ground level, so that they could really appreciate what it was like to be in this incredibly vibrant, thriving neighborhood. And so we wanted to choose a block that we could really dive into and give people a sense of what it was like to be there. We chose a stretch of Greenwood Avenue that was kind of the beginning, as I called it earlier, the gateway to the neighborhood. And we were lucky to have 2 photographs that we identified as pre, and other archives as well identified as pre-massacre. This is very important because this entire block, which was kind of the heart of the neighborhood, it was some of the earliest businesses were there, and it was some of the kind of most thriving businesses that existed in the neighborhood at the time were on this block. But this is also one of the first blocks to have been burned down, and it was burned down completely. And it was rebuilt to look very similar to what it was before. So it's really tricky trying to find and identify and time the photographs. And the other challenge was that these photographs, while at a slightly different angle, are both taken from the same intersection, and you can only see as far as you can see from that place. So we really had to do a lot of investigative digging up of details and trying to really pull out as much as we could see from this limited angle of view to start modeling these details manually. Because as amazing a resource as the machine learning algorithms was for recreating a large swath of the city, because we wanted to bring our readers closer to what this neighborhood, to the ground, and to really give them a sense of the neighborhood, we wanted to truly pull out fine details that could start igniting their imagination and really make people feel immersed in that place. You could see this is the work mostly done. The research was done by an amazing editor, Gilbert Gates, along with Mika Grondal, who both researched and then modeled these fine details. He's an architect by background and does the most meticulous, painstaking detail work on any project that I've ever seen. So one of the challenges was, as I mentioned, that we had these 2 limited photographs, and that was it. Most of the references to that block were gone. But what Mika and Gilbert did was look at the photos of the destruction that happened afterwards. And that gave us a clue about what the walls of the buildings might have been, where the windows went. And so, though we couldn't recreate the details of signs, on the houses, or the ornaments around the windows, or the window frames, or the doors, we could at least get the placement of them and the sizing of them correctly. But it was also a challenge because these photos of the destruction, some taken by residents and journalists within the Black community, within the neighborhood, some taken for nefarious reasons to send as postcards, as among the KKK, among others. But these photographs are out there, and there's a lot of them, and but they're not labeled. So it is really hard to tell sometimes what part of the neighborhood you're looking at. And so Mika and Gilbert did this amazing visual investigation of trying to match these little details both to each other and then to the map and identify. You could see that they used a fire hydrant in these photos. to really like understand what building they're looking at. And then they were able to use the remaining standing architecture to model out the building. There were newspapers, old and also those that featured the destruction afterwards, that were incredibly helpful. And then small details that like a safe in this case that helped, that was left in the middle of a street after looting, that help tie photograph together, and again help us understand what this photograph is depicting, which buildings are there, so we could go back and use it for the manual modeling work that was done. The map was indispensable because when you're looking at the photographs from a single angle that we had, the limiting aspect of it is that you often can't tell that there may be a building. So like on the left here, you could see what we thought was a two buildings side by side, but what in reality the Sandbar map showed us was that there was actually an extra building squeezed a little bit towards the back in between. And so it was this constant investigation and constant checking between the photographic references, the images of the damage, post the massacre, and the map. For anyone who is interested, and this is getting into the nitty-gritty, so I will talk really quickly through it. But this is Mika Grondal's incredible process in 3D of how he actually used these photographs in the 3D scene to reconstruct the details. He projected the photographs through a camera, and he looked through that camera at that photograph, and he tried to kind of gauge, he tried to match the geometry that we derived from the building footprints to the details in the photograph, and try to kind of gauge the focal length and the type of length and the location of the camera, with a lot of back and forth tweaking and some historical research. But eventually he kind of got these photographs placed, these reference photos placed where they matched the buildings in the scene that were, built from the map, close enough where he was able to start really guessing where the windows would go and really starting to like build in the details into this otherwise faceless geometry. There was a lot of unknowns where it was a lot of guesses had to be made. For example, in this case, it was very unclear. We were looking at the Dixie Theater, which was this theater on the block we're modeling, and in the map, in the Sandbar map, you could see that there was some kind of a structure, some kind of like right here, yellow structure, that could have been an awning. It could have been like an actual like structure with booths. We just had no idea. And so we had to make a decision in terms of how we want to handle those kind of unknowns. And we chose to keep it as simple and as pure as possible. In this case, for this unknown structure, we kind of kept it as a box, but we had to take a liberty on a few things, and by keeping them visually simple, we hoped that we would convey that this was a guess and an approximation, and not the final kind of detailed structure that existed. The spacing of windows, we took guesses about how they would have been spaced in terms of comparing the what Mika was seeing through this reference photograph, and where the windows would reasonably go on the map, or on a building. Again, being an architect, Mika had a greater insight into what made sense. And then this is Mika Grondal and his genius. He didn't stop at the buildings. He researched cars. We had one of the families that we profiled in the article was John and Lola Williams, who were just these amazing business owners who owned several businesses on the block, and were just this like family, a noteworthy family that whose story was really important to us, and we wanted to feature it. They have this photograph where they're in their family car, and so Mika went and he modeled this car meticulously based on references of cars from the time. He tracked down the make and model. So he went really deep on the modeling of this car and other cars that would have existed historically in the neighborhood at the time, based on visual references in the archives. there was trolley drama. So there was, you could see a little bit of a Slack exchange with our editor, incredible editor, whose name I should have mentioned in the beginning, Hyon Park, who ran this project and edited and did an incredible job. Well, this was like a few days before publishing, when at 10 p.m. we realized that the trolley that Mika modeled was historically off by a few years. And so he went back and he remodeled it, and we re-rendered the whole scene, because that's the kind of editor that Mika is. He matched every historical detail to the T. And the difference between the two trolleys was would have been very small to a casual observer, but yeah, this was our last minute trolley drama. So we have this 3D model, and I've mentioned several times that this, we thought of it as a stage that would host these narratives and these stories of people who lived and who thrived and who were deeply impacted by the massacre. And that, to populate this block, we've already had data on the larger neighborhood from the city directory and the census, but to truly understand every building and every story within that building, we started using the city directory. And kind of, in the earlier days, we were just using that original 1918 map to kind of start placing the names of these businesses and the names of the buildings, because these buildings all had names based on the owners of the buildings, and trying to match them with the addresses, match the addresses to the physical building location. And the biggest resource for us to really dive deep and to start getting the stories, not of just the business names, but the actual people, behind the businesses, was the Tulsa Star. And I think that is like the most one of the kind of the trio of things that really came together. It was to make this project live. It was the maps. It was data resources like the census and the city directories, but it was also access to the neighborhood newspaper, the Tulsa Star, which published articles about the residents and the most minute details of their lives, who had a cold, who went to visit their uncle in another state, and who also ran this Tulsa Colored Business Directory, which actually helped us fact check a lot of the businesses we were coming across in the city directory. We found businesses listed in the newspaper for that year that were not listed in the city directory, and that helped us enrich the data set that we already had, and also glean kind of details about these businesses as well, because this listing of businesses in the newspaper had little sentences, little descriptions about what the store did and what they sold, and the goods and the people. And sometimes it allowed us to find the names of the business owners as well. And this little story, and I'm so sorry, Dr. Miller, but could you remind me if on the time, I completely realized that I'm not keeping track and I don't want to go over.
Perhaps another 5-10 minutes, Max.
Okay.
Would that be okay?
That would be perfect. Then I will tell this little story about a cafe owner, Mrs. Bell, who owned a business. It was Susie Bell, and I'm sorry, the details are now escaping me, and I'm blocking out on the full name. But at the time, I was just enamored with this woman whose name I came across several times in a number of newspaper articles from the Tulsa Star. She was a business owner, a restaurateur. She was a well-known cafe and restaurant owner in the neighborhood. She owned several businesses for about a decade, and her story was just very interesting and very unique. She was just this powerful individual and character who was clearly beloved by people in the neighborhood. And her business was listed on the street, on this block that we were going to profile, up until probably a year or so, or 2 years before the massacre. And then there was a fire and she moved somewhere else. And I was just heartbroken that we couldn't really pull her into our visual narrative because it was grounded in this location. But I kept reading the articles, and it was a lot of drama where she'd open another business there, but then that closed. And eventually probably a week or so, or 2 weeks, or several weeks before publication, I found several articles confirming that she did in fact reopen her cafe again on that block. And so we were able to feature her story. And it was, though we actually didn't find a photograph of her, her story was able to make it into that section of the article where we featured the more detailed information about the business owners, and gave me such joy. So we had these, several sources for businesses. We had the city directory that gave us the names of the businesses and the addresses, and we had this newspaper ads that I just mentioned that let us confirm and also enrich the data set we had. But we also had a third source. We basically had 3 different sources for these businesses we located and named, and that was this book, which was published, I believe, a year after the massacre. It was called The Events of the Tulsa Disaster by Mary Jones Parrish, and she was a typewriting teacher, but also a journalist and a historian living on that block. So she was one of the people we featured, and she was hired to document the events and to speak to business owners throughout the neighborhood after the events transpired, to just have a record of what was lost. And so she compiled, at the end of more personal kind of narratives of the night's events, the day's events, she compiled a list of everything that was there, of the businesses, with the business number, with the business owners' names, and the value of what was lost. And it was an incredibly helpful resource as well. And I mentioned those 3 sources because one of the biggest challenges, we had the list of addresses, we had the business names, we had the people's names associated with those businesses, but now we had to match the addresses to the physical buildings, right? Because we're showing these 3D buildings. And the one issue we ran into was that there was a building number change between and I apologize, I realize now that I got the wrong dates on these maps, but it was a 1915 and the 1920 map. In the 1915 map, which is on the left, ignore the numbers at the top of the presentation, the numbers, by 1920 on the right, the numbers shifted by 2 on one side of the street. And there was a lot of digging and a lot of investigation, understanding of what that meant in the context of Sanborn maps, and a lot of reliance on the 3 different sources that were built up, the ads in the newspaper and the city directory, to try to understand what those changes meant. And we were able to figure it out. We were able to match the right buildings to the right names through a lot of deep digging. And the ability to be able to reference 3 different sources for addresses and business names gave us the confidence that we were placing these businesses correctly. This is some of the back end showing the business names that, as you scroll through the article, appear attached to each building. The stories we told are just a few of those that we've investigated. I think I deep dove into about 30 profiles, reading about the lives of so many different people. I had like 50 more that I wanted to go to, and then we had to pare back, and we were never going to really be able to tell more than a handful in the article itself. There were so many interesting people that still live with us after all this time. And the final step was for us, after we've done all this research, we wanted to make sure that we share all this data, the 3D model, and the maps back to the data back to the communities of researchers and scholars and just people living in the community in Tulsa, so that other people can build upon it and absorb it into their amazing work that they were already doing at the time. We made this data, or some aspect of this data, available on GitHub. So thank you very much. I hope that I painted the work of my colleagues fairly and correctly. And I'd love to hear any questions you might have.
Yes, thank you very much. 3 months, you say, to do that. That's a lot of work in just 3 months. Incredible. Yeah, and please, people in the audience, please put questions into the Q&A and we'll get to them as soon as we can. Maybe I'll start off with just a couple myself. Uh, so I was curious about this camera projection technique you use. I don't want to get too geeky about this, but it was more that it was so painstaking that you wanted to make sure the buildings were like very accurate. And then you mentioned cars and streetcars and making sure the streetcar model was the right model. That sounds a very strict truth standard, but really what you were trying to do in this is really give people the impressions of what was lost and the stories now people were affected. So I guess I want to ask, why that level of accuracy?
I mean, this is for us working, as part of a newsroom, and telling the story from the perspective of journalists. We have a ethical standard that we have to adhere by, and the idea of adding any detail to a story is so fraught with dangers when you're talking about something that is such a powerful tale of destruction and of racism and of violence. We didn't want to leave any details that could be questioned. That is one reason in general why we adhere to these ethics for any story. Because we did not want to leave anything to chance. Anything that could give anybody a reason to debate this really painful, really violent, really horrific act inflicted upon this amazing neighborhood. We didn't want anybody to question or take away from the richness and the history of it as well. So something as small as an embellished texture on a building, in the context of where we're telling the story and the other stories that we tell in our platform and our space for our readers, it makes a huge difference.
Okay. So what was the reaction to this? Can you tell it locally, nationally, internationally? What do you hope is the lasting impact of this work?
The reaction was very moving. We had and it was definitely divided. We had people reaching out saying who were thanking us for telling the story that they knew, that they've learned about, that they've heard from their families, but that was not taught in schools. That is very important to note, that the story in Tulsa was not told for a very long time, not in schools, not officially, not acknowledged by the local government, not acknowledged by the greater government. So this was a story that went untold for so long. And so we did have an outpouring of people who were really glad to see it be told in detail and to celebrate what was there and to acknowledge what happened and what was lost. There were people who were surprised because they haven't heard about it. And there were people who have been working on this, who were scholars, who have been, working on this for a long time, who have dedicated their lives to it, who, we were able to engage with after the project and during the project. And the lasting impact of this work, we hope, is some kind of a humble addition to the work that was already being done and that existed there before. Because again, the communities that of researchers and of scholars and of just people passionate about investigating and preserving history is great and have achieved so much. So this is a drop in the bucket of what's already there.
And I know there's a court case still going on. There's two survivors who are still alive, and there's a court case to offer them reparations.
Yeah.
You mentioned that book that was written a year after the massacre that had estimates of the property losses. Has any of this figured into that court case or into wider calls for reparations?
I don't know enough about the court case. I mean, we followed it at the time, but I don't know enough of the details to really speak to that. But yes, definitely. I mean, that is one of the most important historical works that is being used to show the worth and the value of what was lost. We tried to map that as well. We did collect that data. We kind of played around with mapping it, but I think a lot of the the loss that exists, and that's a topic again I'm not as well versed in, but the greatest loss is a loss of generational wealth. So the numbers that you see, which were great and they were stunning and they were important, especially when translated into today's amounts, the true loss is a loss of potential. And I think that's like one of the reasons why we didn't end up using that map was because it wouldn't begin to speak to what was truly lost financially and otherwise.
No, that is a big issue in not only in Tulsa, but in other neighborhoods that were damaged by redlining, urban renewal, and urban highways, that the dollar losses translated into current day dollars would be in the millions, and the loss of intergenerational wealth transfer is just resonates to this day, along with the other impacts. I'm going to turn over to Jordan in just a minute, but I'd like to ask you this, what is the biggest lesson that you learned from this? If someone else was going to reproduce this work somewhere else, what would you tell them starting out?
I think, and I mentioned that during the presentation as well, the reason why we were able to truly recreate this and bring it to life, and I did say in the context of archival research, it was like the combination of three things. It was data sources like census and city directories. It was the maps, presence of maps, and being able to track down Sanborn maps specifically, and then access to a newspaper, local newspaper. If any one of those, we've tried to do this for other neighborhoods as a follow story, and it was very hard. We tried to cover other massacres that happened around that time, and when any one of those three things was lacking, it was definitely a much more difficult task. You couldn't kind of bring it to the same level of completion. But the fourth aspect, which I did not talk about because that was not the primary focus of my work, was the research Audra Birch did. She flew out to Tulsa and she was on the ground and she interviewed survivors and well, a few of those who could be interviewed, but mostly descendants of survivors. And that work was absolutely instrumental to bringing it to life. And if I have like a minute, I'd love to tell a story of how Audra, like the amazing serendipity that happens when you're able to be somewhere physically. She traveled to speak to one of the descendants of the people that we were profiling on that block. We knew that we wanted to talk about these two brothers who were they owned a shoemaking, like a cobbler shop on the block, and they were also very involved in the music scene. And so Audra was able to speak to I believe the granddaughter or the niece. I apologize, it's been a few years, I'm forgetting, but she interviewed this descendant, and as they're talking, she said, "Hey, do you want to see a photograph?" Now, we've scoured the archives for photographs of any of the individuals that we wanted to show. There were very few photographs. And I knew that there was no photograph of this person. I looked and looked and looked. And because she spoke to this person, it just so happened that the descendant went into an archive, I guess because of the approaching centennial, and she was able to identify with an archivist, independently of our research, her ancestor, one of the survivors. And so we have a photo of them on the block, which was such a magical thing to be able to show their face and to be able to do it. So it's that fourth aspect of going to the place, of talking to people, to the community, that truly also brings it to life.
Yeah, and I want to recommend to our listeners to actually look into the history of this massacre, and also there were other massacres that happened, racial massacres around the United States at this time. So it really is a tragic story we couldn't really dive into, but it is something that people should know about. Okay, Jordan.
Yeah, we have a bunch of great questions from the chat. I think two I can combine quickly here. Is the machine learning tool for extracting building footprints from the Sanborn maps available to others? And then you mentioned the audio component of this work. Are any of those oral histories available as well?
There is no audio component from our end, but there is a rich audio archive from several sources that I came across, not combined in a single place, but several historical societies and archives in the area have audio recordings that I've listened to for my research that are amazing and worthwhile. And I'm so sorry, what was the first part?
And on the extracting footprints from the Sandboard maps, is that tool that was created available to the public?
Not on our end. This was LinkedIn One's work. Anybody who wants to, you can Google him. His website comes up. He would be somebody to reach out to. But I would also, forward that question to Dr. Miller, whose team seems to have gotten much farther than we have in this venture. We only had a few months to work on this, and I was thrilled about what we were able to do. But yeah, there's a lot more that can be done.
Right. And to that point, we have a question. If you had more time to work on this project, what more would you add or change? And have you seen other similar projects after this work was completed?
So there is work being done by so many amazing scholars in Tulsa. And they have been doing it for years. So while they're not using our platform and they don't have the resources and the 3D power of the New York Times, their work is incredibly important. There's an archaeologist. I'm sorry, I'm like Googling as we're talking because I don't want to get her name wrong. Apologies. But Dr. Alicia Dewala is somebody who is a scholar who's been doing very similar kind of research, looking at businesses and looking at it from both geographical and like 3D model perspective. We were unable to work with her for that story at the time. We were powering through and just it didn't work out. But she is somebody who leads the way on this research for that area. So as far as similar projects, I would definitely look at the community and what they're doing. And again, there was a part of this question that I completely blocked out. Can you remind me?
Yeah, just other projects that you've seen since then in terms of reconstructions. And as Dr. Miller put in the chat, we're doing similar work in Columbus that you can check out in the link there. But any other that come to mind, Yuliya?
I've spoken to a few people. There was somebody in Chicago who is trying to reconstruct like a street that was like a big hub of immigration there. I haven't seen a lot of like historical reconstructions in terms of publications, but I don't know if I've just missed it because I've been so absorbed in other coverage since then.
Thank you. And yeah, definitely take a look at the work we're doing at CURA. Another question, such an incredible project. It's evident that you had this really large team working together across the mapping tools and archives. Did you lead and coordinate the work? And could you give any tips about how you managed this project as a whole?
This project is unique. I don't think the tips from it would be as helpful in terms of management, other than to say that we wanted to give it a year and it deserved a year. We did a year of work, but in 3 months, and I don't recommend it. Hyan Park was our incredible editor who pulled it all together and kind of pulled all the strings. I co-led the reporting and I handled some of the 3D work. Anjali Singhvi co-led the reporting and she handled a lot of the geospatial and data analysis work, as well as some of the 3D. And Mika Grondal handled, and Gilbert Gates handled the 3 kind of visual archiving. It is very unique and it was not very pipelined. We have not had such a tremendous undertaking before or since as a department. We've done other really complicated work, but I think it was a combination of the type of reporting, which was new to us. As a newsroom, we focus on the current, and this was archivally focused. So combining that with data analysis and geospatial analysis, but also cinematography and design, which I did not speak to at all in this conversation. But there's the whole component of how do you tell a visual story, and how do you dive into it? How do you come out of it? How do the visuals drive it? And how do the words live with it? Which was the beautiful poetic language that Arthur Birch brought to it just, was another dimension of the story that is unique from my experience. So yes, I understand. I completely did not answer your question, but it is very hard to give tips on this kind of production because, well, we didn't sleep for 3 months. I worked 7 days a week for 3 months, 12 to 18 hours a day. I have screenshots of like we would have random meetings at 2 a.m. in the morning because we were all up and working. We're like, hey, let's meet. Yeah.
Okay, we're out of time. So first of all, I want to say to my CURA team, see, I'm not such a bad boss, am I? I'm not working you 7 days a week. But I understand that the monumental undertaking you've done here and what you've achieved in only 3 months was just incredible. And I was really impressed when this article came out in May 2021, and I'm really appreciative of your time today to hear more details about how you did it. And thank you everyone for being here today. Thank you, Yuliya. This was really a fantastic talk, and is a great kickoff to our series this summer. Our next talk will be on June 14th. What historic maps reveal about the formation of racial environmental inequality in U.S. cities? And this will be by Jonathan Tollefson, who's a PhD candidate in sociology at Brown University and part of the Institute at Brown for the Environment and Society. So we hope to see you on June 14th, and take care, everyone. Be careful out there and do good. Bye, everyone.